Hi, this is Catherine of ResinObsession.com, and I'm here today to show you a few of my tips and tricks on how to get bubbles out of your resin jewelry castings. So before we get started, just a few safety things. You'll notice my purple hands in the video today. I'll be wearing nitrile gloves, and you also need to make sure and work in a well-ventilated area. Wear a respirator mask if necessary. I also work on a surface that's been coated with wax paper. This easily tapes down to your counter, and the nice thing is that if you spill some resin, it'll wipe right off the wax paper, or when you're done, you just pull up all your wax paper, crumple it up, and throw it away. So today I'm going to be using a little bit of epoxy resin that I mixed and had left over from an earlier casting today. I'll be using our popular mold 403 that I've preconditioned with some Cast and Craft mold release spray. And then one of the tricks today is also going to show you how to use a drinking straw. Okay, so one of the first tricks right away to prevent the bubbles in your casting is to be very careful when you're mixing your resin. You'll notice that this resin, there are very, very few bubbles in it. One of the ways that I like to mix epoxy resin is to hold my stir stick and mix without picking up the stick. That really helps to minimize the number of bubbles that I introduce into the resin. I also want to stir very carefully and deliberately, but don't whip or act like you get a whisk over your resin. So you want to do everything you can to minimize the bubbles right away. Now the next step, at least for me, kind of depends on what I'm doing next. If I've mixed a big batch of resin and I'm just going to do a few big pours into a couple of big molds, I might let my resin sit for a couple of minutes to let the bubbles rise to the top, and then you can take your stir utensil and push the bubbles to the side to help get the bubbles out of the way. If you're doing a couple of big castings, that works well. If you're doing multiple small castings though, by the time you wait for the resin to sit, you push the bubbles out of the way, then sometimes by the time you get done with pouring your last few pieces, your resin's already starting to cure, and at that point you're really not going to get the bubbles out. So for experiment purposes here today, or at least for the purpose of this video, I'm going to go ahead and whip a bunch of bubbles into this so we have some bubbles to play with to try and get out. Okay, so you can see in there now there's a lot more bubbles in there. Okay, all of different sizes. Okay, let me just whip a few more in there and make sure we got plenty to work with. But this is kind of like almost like how you're getting scrambled eggs ready if you're getting ready to cook in the morning. This is not how you want to mix your resin. Okay, now at this point it just about looks like Alka-Seltzer. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and get our mold over here, and I'm going to pour our resin into the mold. Okay, see all the bubbles? Okay. Now at this point, this is a pretty big casting, so you might be able to get away with waiting for a couple of minutes and see how many bubbles you can get to rise to the top. Everyone's kind of, got their own way and own system of trying to get bubbles out. One technique that I've seen some people use is to pour the resin into their mold and then take an incandescent light bulb, attached to a light, like a gooseneck lamp, hold it over the resin and let the heat help draw the bubbles to the top. The problem with that is that during that time, the resin's starting to cure, and so certainly if there's some dust or, like in this studio, cat hair, and it gets in your resin, nothing can ruin a beautiful piece of resin jewelry faster than some cat hair. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and try and get my bubbles out instead of waiting. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a couple other methods on how to get the bubbles out of your resin. So one of the methods I like to use is to take my stir stick and actually take the bubbles and just draw them out with the stick. Okay, and I'll put them here, I'll draw them out and put them here on the edge of my resin cup. Okay. Okay, and I'll do that on the side. Okay. Now one of the other techniques I like to use is to use the drinking straw that I was showing you earlier. If you're going to use this technique, please, please, please don't use it if you're a novice. Get a little experience with the resin first, because if you don't do this correctly, you can hurt yourself. But what you're going to do is hold your straw right above a bubble, and you're going to use just a little bit of your breath to pop the bubble. So you're going to blow through the straw forcefully and distinctly onto the bubble. Okay? And you'll notice it pops right away. And what happens is the carbon dioxide in your breath helps to get the bubble to pop. Now, if you're going to do this, just blow and then wait a couple seconds and see how many bubbles pop. The reason being is that the moisture in your breath can settle out on your resin and can keep that area tacky and not cure properly. So you just want to kind of blow a little bit and then check and see how many bubbles pop. Now you'll see some people use the torch technique to get bubbles out of their resin. In all honesty, I've never had good experience with the torch, although quite frankly, it's probably more of my issue because I have this fear of using a torch on plastic and then I'm going to set something on fire or melt it all over my countertops. I do have a metalsmithing studio, and certainly I take every safety precaution there to make sure that I don't catch something on fire. So it's probably just that I'm not doing it right. However, I will say that I do use a heat gun. This is a heat gun that you can find in a crafting store that you can use to shrink wrap the plastic around, say, a gift basket. And these are great. They really generate some heat. And so you'll just apply it. And you see the bubbles just pop very quickly. Okay. If you're going to do this, though, be careful because the heat will warp these molds, and there is a little bit of force to the air behind it. So in a mold, it works well, but if you're talking about using it on a doming pendant or you're trying to dome something, there can be enough force in the air behind it that it could push your resin off onto the side. Now, one of the last tips and tricks that I recommend, and I kind of found this out just by playing around, and that was, I found that when I would check my resin castings when I got done and I didn't see any bubbles, but then when I would come back later, I would find bubbles in them. And so the question to myself was, were those bubbles there all along, or were these bubbles that were trapped and came out later? So I started using an LED light. You'll see this is an LED night light. It's rechargeable. I plug it into the wall, and it really helps to illuminate your resin. And you can really see all sorts of bubbles down in there that just for me to look at it right now, I see a few, but not like I do when I have this LED light. You can also get these as camping gear, and it can strap to your head. So even better, you can have light and have both hands free. So those are a few of my tips and tricks on how to get bubbles out of your epoxy resin castings. Please come on over to ResinObsession.com. We have more tips and tricks on our blog, and we also have a resin jewelry making forum where you're welcome to leave your questions, comments on others' dilemmas, questions, concerns, or just general please help. So thanks for stopping by today. If you have some comments or your other tips that you'd like to share with others, by all means, please leave them in the comment box below.